Hi, Scorpio. This reading already feels incredibly intense, and honestly, I don't think this person expected their feelings to get this deep. Okay, because the energy coming through is someone who has been trying very hard to stay in control. They've been telling themselves they're fine. They've been acting like everything is normal. But underneath all of that, something keeps pulling them back to you. I keep feeling this constant battle inside of them. The more they try to focus on other things, the more Scorpio seems to find a way back into their thoughts. And it's not just memories, it's your energy. It's your presence. It's the way this connection continues to linger even when they try to push it away. Honestly, this person is carrying around feelings they haven't fully admitted out loud. They miss you more than they let anyone know. They think about you more than they would ever admit. And every time they convince themselves they're moving on, something happens that reminds them of you all over again. And that's the interesting part, because what I'm picking up on isn't someone who has stopped caring. It's someone who has been fighting their feelings for a very long time and starting to realize they may not be winning that fight anymore. Because honestly, Scorpio, the more I sit with this energy, the harder it becomes to ignore what this person is trying so desperately not to feel. It's almost like they've been convincing themselves that everything is under control, that they're okay, that they've moved on, that whatever happened between the two of you doesn't affect them anymore. But the moment they're left alone with their own thoughts, the entire story changes. And I keep seeing the moon sitting right at the center of this reading. Not because they're confused about how they feel. It's because they're hiding how deeply they feel. There are emotions here that never made it to the surface. Words that were never spoken. Conversations they replay over and over in their head but never actually have with you. This person has become very good at pretending. Good at smiling. Good at distracting themselves. Good at acting like nothing is wrong. But underneath that, there's so much happening. Honestly, I don't think people around them even realize it, because when this person is around friends, family, coworkers, whoever it may be, they seem perfectly fine. They laugh when they're supposed to laugh. They show up where they're supposed to show up. They handle their responsibilities. Yet the second the noise fades away, you show up, your name, your face, your energy, a memory, a song, a random thought that shouldn't matter anymore, and somehow it always leads back to Scorpio. The Seven of Cups is here, and what I'm picking up is somebody who spends far more time thinking about this connection than they would ever admit. You know, they keep imagining different outcomes, different conversations, different possibilities, different versions of events where things unfolded differently between the two of you. Sometimes they imagine reaching out. Sometimes they imagine seeing you unexpectedly. Sometimes they imagine hearing from you. And then they catch themselves doing it and immediately try to pull themselves back into reality. But the thoughts keep returning. That's what makes this energy so intense, because they're not trying to remember you. They're trying not to. And that's a completely different thing. The harder they push the thoughts away, the stronger they seem to become. The Eight of Swords feels very present around this person. There is a constant battle happening inside of them. Part of them wants to let go. Part of them doesn't even know how. Part of them thinks they should move forward. Another part of them keeps looking over their shoulder emotionally. And honestly, I feel exhaustion here, mental exhaustion, because carrying around feelings that nobody knows about can become very heavy after a while, especially when those feelings continue growing, especially when they never received the closure they thought they needed. I keep getting this image of someone lying awake long after everyone else has gone to sleep, not reaching out, not saying anything, just thinking about what happened, thinking about what they should have said, thinking about what Scorpio might be doing, thinking about whether you still think about them too, and then pretending none of it happened the following day. The High Priestess energy feels incredibly strong because there is so much left unsaid between the two of you. This person knows more than they reveal, feels more than they admit, misses more than they confess. And I don't think they're ready to expose all of that just yet. In fact, I feel like they've been protecting these feelings for a long time, keeping them hidden, keeping them private, almost treating them like a secret they aren't ready to share with the world. But here's the thing that's becoming impossible for them to ignore. The feelings aren't getting smaller. They're getting louder. The memories aren't fading. They're becoming harder to escape. And every time they think they've finally gained control over their emotions, something shifts inside of them again. Something reminds them. Something pulls them back. Something makes them wonder whether this connection is really as far behind them as they've been trying to convince themselves it is. And honestly, that's where this energy starts getting even more interesting. Because what they're doing behind the scenes right now tells a much bigger story than what they're showing on the surface. Because what I'm seeing here isn't someone who has completely walked away emotionally. It's actually the opposite. The more distance there seems to be between the two of you, the more aware they become of your presence in their life. Okay, this is interesting. The Page of Swords keeps pulling my attention towards somebody who acts like they're busy living their life, but somehow always finds themselves looking in your direction. And I don't necessarily mean that in an obvious way. This feels subtle, quiet, hidden. Like somebody who checks something and then immediately tells themselves it meant nothing. Somebody who notices your name somewhere and pauses for a second longer than they intended. Somebody who hears about you from another person and pretends not to care, while secretly holding on to every detail afterward. Honestly, Scorpio, curiosity has become a much bigger part of their life than they would ever admit. Because the truth is, they don't feel finished with you. And when people don't feel finished with someone, they tend to keep looking back. I keep hearing this energy of, I wonder what they're doing now. I wonder if they're happy. I wonder if they still think about me. And then almost immediately afterward, they try to shut those thoughts down. But it never really works. The Six of Cups feels incredibly emotional here. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just deeply personal. There are moments from the past that this person carries around with them more than you realize. Small moments, conversations, looks, little details that should have faded by now but somehow haven't. You know, it's almost funny because I feel like they remember things you probably forgot years ago. The way you laughed at something, a random message, a specific day, a specific place. Something about your energy imprinted itself on their memory in a way they didn't expect. And what makes this harder for them is that those memories don't feel distant. They still feel alive. They still carry emotion. Sometimes a memory appears out of nowhere and completely changes their mood. Sometimes they're focused on something else and suddenly they're back in a moment that involved Scorpio. And for a few seconds, everything else disappears. The star is showing up here in a way that feels very soft, very human. Because beneath all the overthinking and all the emotional resistance, there is still something inside of them that lights up when they think about you. Not because they have everything figured out, not because they know exactly what this connection means, but because you represent something they haven't been able to replace. Something genuine. Something that continues to stand out even after all this time. And honestly, I think that realization scares them a little. Because people can ignore feelings. People can distract themselves. People can stay busy. But when somebody continues to occupy a special place in your heart despite all of that, eventually you have to ask yourself why. The moon appears again, and I feel like this person spends a lot of time hiding these thoughts from everyone around them. Nobody really knows how often Scorpio crosses their mind. Nobody really knows how emotional they become when certain memories return. Nobody really knows how much they still wonder about you. Because they've become very protective of this part of themselves. Almost secretive. And yet, at the same time, I feel this growing inability to pretend that none of it matters. They're reaching a point where avoidance isn't giving them the relief it once did. The distractions don't work as well. The excuses don't feel as convincing. The distance doesn't erase the connection. If anything, it keeps forcing them to look at what remains. And what remains is significant. Because every road they try to take away from these feelings somehow circles back around to Scorpio again. Not in a dramatic way, not in an obsessive way. More like a quiet realization that your energy has become woven into parts of their life they didn't expect. And the more they recognize that, the harder it becomes to keep pretending they're unaffected. Because beneath the curiosity, beneath the memories, beneath all the quiet observation, something much bigger is beginning to surface inside of them. Something they've been trying not to face for a very long time. Something about their world doesn't feel as comfortable as it used to. Okay, that's the first thing I'm noticing here. The routines that once distracted them aren't working the same way anymore. The people they used to listen to don't seem to have all the answers. Even the choices they were so sure about at one point are starting to feel uncertain. And honestly, I think that's where a lot of this internal tension is coming from. Because the devil is showing up, and this feels like someone standing face to face with parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. Not because they wanted to be dishonest, not because they wanted to hurt anyone, but because certain fears became familiar, certain patterns became comfortable, certain excuses became easier than dealing with the truth. You know, sometimes people get so used to surviving that they forget to ask themselves whether they're actually happy. And that's exactly what this energy feels like. This person is beginning to realize that some of the things they've been holding on to are no longer helping them grow. some of the beliefs they've carried, some of the fears they've obeyed, some of the expectations they've tried to live up to. They're starting to feel the weight of all of it. And the more they question it, the harder it becomes to keep pretending everything is fine. The Five of Wands feels incredibly loud around them, not necessarily because there is conflict happening externally. For many of you, this feels like conflict happening inside their own mind. One side of them wants safety, another side wants freedom. One side wants to keep things exactly as they are. Another side keeps whispering that something needs to change. And honestly, I don't think they're sleeping very peacefully right now. There is a restless quality surrounding this energy, like someone who keeps arriving at the same realization over and over again, but isn't quite ready to fully accept it. I keep seeing them replaying decisions, replaying conversations, replaying moments where they chose one direction while secretly wanting another. And what's difficult is that they can no longer blame anyone else for what they're feeling, because the answers they're searching for aren't outside of them, they're inside of them. That's why judgment feels so powerful here. Something is waking up, not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily, like a voice becoming impossible to ignore, a truth becoming harder to escape, a realization slowly finding its way to the surface. This person is beginning to see themselves differently. They're beginning to look back at their own actions through a different lens. And honestly, Scorpio, I feel humility here. Because for some of them, they're recognizing things they wish they had understood sooner, not just about you, about themselves, about the choices they made, about what truly mattered. There is a level of accountability beginning to develop that wasn't fully present before. And that's uncomfortable. Growth usually is, especially when it requires someone to admit that fear played a bigger role in their decisions than they wanted to believe. The Hermit keeps pulling this energy inward, away from the noise, away from outside opinions, away from distractions. I almost feel like this person has become more withdrawn lately, more reflective, more interested in understanding why they react the way they do, why certain emotions affect them so deeply, why Scorpios still occupy space in their heart when they thought enough time had passed. And what they're finding isn't necessarily what they expected, because every path they follow inward seems to lead them toward the same lesson, the same realization, the same answered feeling. It's almost like life keeps presenting them with opportunities to look away, but something keeps turning their attention back toward what they haven't healed, back toward what they haven't acknowledged, back toward what they haven't fully faced. And while they may not have all the answers yet, they're no longer running as fast as they used to. They're starting to sit with the discomfort, starting to listen, starting to question, starting to understand that change isn't something happening around them. It's something happening within them. And the deeper they go into that process, the more they begin to recognize that this connection may have triggered far more transformation than they ever expected. Because what they're discovering about themselves right now is leading them toward a decision they won't be able to avoid forever. There's a heaviness surrounding this person that feels different from before. Not confusion, not resistance. More like the weight that comes from finally seeing something clearly. Okay, because I keep getting the feeling that certain truths have become impossible for them to ignore. The Five of Cups is sitting here, and honestly, this energy feels incredibly personal. I don't think this person expected regret to hit them the way it has. For a long time, they were focused on what was in front of them, the responsibilities, the distractions, the reasons they gave themselves for keeping emotional distance. But lately, their attention keeps drifting toward what isn't there anymore. And that's where things become emotional, because absence has a way of teaching lessons that presence never could. You know, when someone is always available, when their energy is always around, it's easy to assume they'll always be there. It's easy to postpone difficult conversations, easy to avoid vulnerable feelings, easy to convince yourself that there's more time. But I feel like this person has been sitting with a growing awareness that some opportunities don't remain unchanged forever, and that realization has been affecting them more deeply than they expected. The memories aren't showing up as fantasies anymore. They're showing up as reminders, reminders of moments they overlooked, reminders of kindness they didn't fully appreciate, reminders of the way Scorpio showed up for them when life felt uncertain. And honestly, I think that's why this energy feels so emotional. Because they're beginning to understand the value of something after experiencing life without it. The Death card feels incredibly significant here, not because they're becoming somebody completely different overnight, but because certain versions of themselves are no longer surviving this process. The version that avoided difficult emotions, the version that kept everything locked away, the version that convinced themselves they didn't need to look deeper. Something about that old way of thinking is beginning to fall away. And while growth sounds beautiful in theory, it rarely feels comfortable while it's happening. This person is confronting parts of themselves that they've never fully examined before. Patterns, habits, defenses, emotional walls. And the deeper they go into that process, the more they recognize how much fear influenced their decisions. Not lack of feeling. Fear. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of rejection. Fear of change. Fear of needing someone more than they wanted to admit. The Ace of Swords keeps appearing like a sudden moment of clarity cutting through months or even years of emotional fog. I keep hearing this energy of realization. Not dramatic, not explosive, just undeniable. A quiet moment where something finally clicks. Where they stop arguing with themselves. Where they stop looking for alternative explanations. Where they stop pretending that Scorpio was just another person who happened to pass through their life. Because that's not how it feels to them anymore. And that's a difficult truth to sit with when you've spent so much time trying to minimize what you feel. Honestly, I think there have been moments recently where this person surprised themselves. Moments where they realized just how much space Scorpio still occupies in their heart. Moments where a memory hit harder than expected. Moments where they felt an emotion so strongly that they couldn't immediately push it away. And every one of those moments has been contributing to this transformation. The Strength card feels less like confidence and more like courage. The courage required to stop running. The courage required to sit with uncomfortable truths. The courage required to admit that some losses matter. Because not everybody is willing to do that. Many people spend years avoiding those conversations with themselves. But this person is slowly moving toward them, slowly allowing themselves to feel what they've spent so long suppressing. And the more honest they become, the more obvious something else becomes too. Their feelings aren't fading. If anything, they're becoming more defined, more understandable, more real. The strange thing is that clarity doesn't automatically make things easier. Sometimes it actually makes things harder. Because once you understand what matters to you, you can no longer hide behind uncertainty. And that's exactly where this person seems to be standing right now. Looking at themselves, looking at the past, looking at everything they've learned through this experience, and realizing that a choice may eventually be required from a version of themselves that no longer wants to keep living the way they used to. A different kind of energy is coming through here. Less emotional confusion, more preparation, more intention. Almost like someone who has spent so much time looking inward that they're beginning to think about what happens if they actually do something about everything they've realized. And honestly, Scorpio, this feels important because I don't get the sense that this person wants to rush. If anything, they seem unusually careful right now. The Chariot is here, but what stands out to me isn't speed, it's direction. For a long time, this person felt scattered, pulled between different fears, different obligations, different versions of themselves. But lately, there's been a growing desire to get their life moving in a way that actually reflects who they are becoming. And part of that journey keeps bringing them back to thoughts of you. Not because they're living in fantasy. Actually, quite the opposite. I feel like they're becoming more practical than they've ever been before. They're asking themselves difficult questions. Questions about stability. Questions about responsibility. Questions about what kind of future they want to build. And the surprising thing is that Scorpio keeps appearing somewhere in those answers. You know, sometimes people reach a point where they stop asking what feels good in the moment and start asking what has lasting value. That's what this energy feels like. The Emperor is stepping into the reading with a very different attitude than the version of this person we've seen before. There is less avoidance here, less emotional running, less dependence on outside circumstances. Instead, I'm seeing someone who wants to feel capable. Someone who wants to know they can stand on their own 2 feet. Someone who doesn't want to make promises they aren't ready to keep. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons this process has been taking longer than they expected. Because they don't want to approach Scorpio carrying the same baggage they've been trying to work through. I keep hearing this thought repeating in their energy. Not yet. Not because they don't care. Not because they've forgotten. But because they want to feel ready. Ready emotionally. Ready mentally. Ready to handle things differently than they did before. The King of Pentacles feels incredibly grounded. I see somebody focusing on practical matters. Work, finances, responsibilities, long-term stability. They're trying to create a stronger foundation underneath themselves. And while it may look from the outside like they're simply busy with life, I feel like there's a deeper motivation behind it. This person wants to feel proud of who they are becoming. They want to feel like if they show up, they have something meaningful to offer. Because one thing that keeps surfacing in this reading is their awareness of past shortcomings. They know there were moments when they weren't fully present, moments when fear made them inconsistent, moments when they weren't operating from their highest self. And there is a genuine desire here to change that. Not for appearances, not to impress anyone, but because they've started holding themselves to a different standard. The Two of Wands keeps showing me someone standing between thought and action. The decision isn't the difficult part anymore. The difficult part is figuring out how. How do they approach this? What do they say? How do they explain everything they've been through internally? How do they bridge the distance that has grown over time? And honestly, I think they've been imagining these scenarios more than Scorpio realizes. Different conversations, different outcomes, different ways of reconnecting. Some of those imagined moments end beautifully. Others make them nervous. Because no matter how much they've grown, there is still vulnerability involved. There is still uncertainty involved. And that uncertainty keeps them planning instead of acting immediately. But I do feel movement here. Not rushed movement. Intentional movement. The kind that happens after someone has spent a very long time examining their own heart. The kind that happens when somebody realizes they don't want to keep sitting at the crossroads forever. Because the more they think about what matters to them, the harder it becomes to ignore one particular truth. Their future no longer feels like something they can picture without asking themselves whether Scorpio still has a place in it. And that question seems to be leading them toward a moment they've been mentally rehearsing for longer than anyone knows. The energy feels much softer here, not weaker, just more honest. Almost like somebody has finally reached the point where fighting their own heart is becoming more exhausting than listening to it. Okay. Because the moment the Lovers appears, everything around this person seems to become very simple, not easy, but simple. All of the complicated explanations, all of the emotional detours, all of the reasons they gave themselves for keeping distance. None of those things seem as convincing anymore. I keep feeling somebody sitting quietly with their thoughts and arriving at the same conclusion over and over again. No matter how many times they try to look at this connection from a different angle, no matter how many times they try to focus on something else, no matter how many times they tell themselves they should feel differently. Their heart keeps bringing them back to the same place, back to Scorpio. And honestly, that realization has changed something inside of them. Because for the first time, I don't feel them arguing with their emotions. I feel them acknowledging them. The Ace of Cups carries such a vulnerable energy in this reading. There are feelings here that have grown quietly over time. Feelings that survived distance. Feelings that survived silence. Feelings that survived confusion. And I think that's part of what surprises this person the most, because they expected these emotions to fade. They expected life to eventually pull them in another direction. But instead, what happened was the opposite. The connection continued living inside them, sometimes loudly, sometimes quietly, but always there, you know? There is a difference between missing someone and feeling emotionally connected to them. And I think this person is finally beginning to understand that difference. This is no longer just nostalgia. It's no longer just curiosity. It's no longer just wondering what Scorpio is doing. This feels deeper, more personal, more meaningful. The Empress energy feels incredibly beautiful here because I keep sensing the way this person views you. Not through perfection, not through fantasy, but through appreciation. There is something about Scorpio that makes them feel understood in a way they struggle to find elsewhere. Something about your energy that allowed them to feel seen without needing to perform, without needing to prove anything, without needing to wear a mask. And honestly, I think they miss that more than they miss anything else. Life has a way of showing people the difference between attention and connection, between attraction and emotional safety, between temporary excitement and genuine care. And this person has been learning those lessons, slowly, painfully, but genuinely. Because when they think about Scorpio, they don't just think about what they wanted. They think about how they felt around you. The comfort, the trust, the feeling of being accepted. And those memories continue to carry emotional weight. The Ten of Cups feels less like a fantasy and more like a question they've been asking themselves lately. A very important question. What would happen if I stopped being afraid? What would happen if I told the truth? What would happen if I stopped pretending I was unaffected? What would happen if I admitted how much this connection has changed me? Those questions seem to follow them everywhere, and I think they're becoming harder to ignore, because every answer leads back toward vulnerability, toward honesty, toward expression. I keep hearing words that were never spoken, apologies that were never given, feelings that were never fully shared, not because they didn't exist, but because this person wasn't ready. At least not then. And that's where so much emotion is sitting right now, not in what happened, but in what never happened. The conversations they wish they had, the moments they wish they had handled differently, the truth they wish they had been brave enough to say sooner. And honestly, Scorpio, I don't think this person wants to carry those words inside forever. There is this growing need to be authentic, a growing desire to stop hiding behind silence, a growing awareness that some feelings deserve to be spoken out loud, even if doing so feels terrifying. Because the more they accept what is in their heart, the more they realize something important. This connection didn't disappear simply because time passed. If anything, it has continued evolving beneath the surface. And that awareness seems to be bringing them closer and closer to a moment where keeping everything inside no longer feels possible. Something tells me this story isn't completely finished yet. There are still feelings being processed, still truths waiting to be acknowledged, still emotions finding their way to the surface. So if you've been feeling this connection lately, trust your own intuition more than anyone else's opinion. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and allow things to unfold in their own time. Thank you so much for being here and sharing this moment with me. I appreciate every single one of you more than you know. Wishing you peace, clarity, and lots of love on your journey ahead. I'll see you in the next reading. Take care, Scorpio. Bye.